Better turn the lights on so they can see me. Now that we're not using the. Oh, here we go. Okay. Let's turn off the waiting room.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna ask everybody at home to mute themselves if you don't mind.
Mhm.
And I'm just gonna share my slides with you guys, even though the people here unfortunately can't see them because technology is not my friend today. But 1 second. I still have them. Okay, here they are. Go back. Let's see if I can print them really quick. All right, we're gonna start in 1 second, everyone at home. Here we go. This is what I wanted. Okay, download as PDF. Let me print more than one on a page. Here we go. Okay, this is perfect. Hello. What are you doing? Hi, guys. Okay, we're having some technology issues. We were supposed to have slides that are not working. So I'm going to share them with the people at home and I'm going to print them if I can connect to the printer, which obviously I'm not doing right now. Ooh, yay. Okay. Coffee. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I hope they're not too small, but I think it'll be okay. Okay. Okay, sorry everyone for the delay. I'm going to be right back. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. If anyone wants to pick them up tomorrow, they're currently printing. But I can't get it. Okay, it's fine. We don't really need them. It would just made it a little easier for you guys to follow, but I'll show you my screen as we go. Okay. This one's where I want to share, but that's not where we're supposed to be right now. Slideshow. Okay. Here we go. Okay, if you are at home and you have a question, just unmute yourself because I never can see the chat while I'm teaching. So just feel free to interrupt if you have a question. Okay. All right. Can you guys see me? You all have your cameras off, but hopefully it's good. All right. I'm really going to.
Yes.
Okay. So we are starting a 3-part series. I literally spent 2 hours today, like putting all of my like messy notes onto slides so everything would be clear for you guys. And then it was working, and then something was a little bit weird and I unplugged it thinking I could make it better, and then it wouldn't work again. So I apologize. So what I'm actually gonna do is as I get to a new slide, I will turn my screen around so you guys can see, and then I just want them to see me, so I'll turn it back around. But basically what I did was I divided this class into 3 parts, okay? So tonight we're basically we're covering what I called the whys, whens, and whats. I don't know if you noticed, but there were 2 versions of the flyer going around. I was told that I couldn't put certain terms into the regular Shabbos announcements for fear that like 8-year-old boys would be like, "Mommy, what's birth control?" And then like during shul, moms would have to like explain things. So I like took out the taglines, but this one was meant to be specifically about a little bit of a discussion of why we do this and why we keep this mitzvah, and in sort of like the bigger kind of challenges involved and how we all sort of feel about it a little bit. I'm not like generally one to like really talk about feelings a lot. I should do it more, but I just don't. But I did want to cover that a little bit and talk about some sources and ideas sort of behind like why we do what we do, and then get into the specifically, I talked about the whens and the whats. So it's really the whats and then the whens. So the whats is like what makes us Niddah, like how we become Niddah, what the different categories are of that. And then we're going to talk about the when, specifically referring to Vestot. It will be a little bit of a quick review of Vestot if you feel like you don't really know Vestot. First of all, I don't think Rivka Bloom's on here right now, but plug for Rivka Bloom, mitzvahcalendar.com. We'll figure it all out for you, and then you don't have to figure it out for yourself. So you really don't have to really understand so much about Vestot. But if anybody wants a more in-depth, like going over of their particular Vestot situation, I'm always happy to chat. I can't cover every individual sort of, you know, like iteration of people's whatever on a 1 hour plus a little bit class. So we're gonna go over the basics of Vestot, but always feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. So what I wanted to start with, if everyone can actually take out their phones. Okay, oh, sorry, this is the whys. Okay, take out your phones, and if you, you can text here. You guys see the numbers. If you text to this number, 33189, sorry, text to the number 22333, and then in the message, you're gonna write the code 33189, and you're gonna answer the question, which is, how do you relate to this mitzvah in 1 word? So we're talking like a 1-word answer, okay? How does this make you feel? I'll say the numbers again for those of you who can't see the screen clearly. You're gonna send the message to 22333, and then write your answer. I'm gonna do it also. We'll talk about that. It's at the end. Don't worry about Vestot right now. The mitzvah of mikvah and separating, and the whole general conversation about like family purity, Taharat, Hamishpacha. And then, okay, when you send the message, you have to put in this code so it goes to my thing, 189. Okay, let me open it up. Hold on. It for sure closed on me. Let's see if it's gone. When my daughter used my Zoom before, she closed the link. Okay, hold on 1 second. Chrome.
Sarah, what was the second number?
I will give it to you in 1 sec. I just closed it, so give me 1 second. Here we go.
It's just how we relate to.
Yeah, like how do you feel about this mitzvah? What do you think? How do you relate to it? What does it make you feel? When I pull it up. Hang on. The computer is really reacting badly to that projector incident. It's very upset. Okay, here is. Here we go. Okay, so we got some responses. Here, here are some of them. If you didn't do it yet, you're gonna text the code 33189 and then your answer, and you're sending it to the number 22333. So I got happily, depends. I like that one. That's one word to say more than one thing. Difficult, factors, challenging, many factors, I'm assuming is one answer. There's a mosquito. So I think that, here we go. Overwhelming, that's a really good one. I think I get that one a lot. Another one for challenging. Okay, we'll keep on emotional. That's a good one. Okay, we'll keep an eye on this. So if you think of more things, we can come back to it soon. But I think it's just interesting to sort of think about how different people sort of relate to this very differently. And I think that's really normal. And that is some sort of part of what we need to sort of think about when we're dealing with this. So I'm just going back to my slides for you guys at home. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the reasons. So I don't know how many of you in your Kala classes were told by your Kala teacher that the reason we keep Taharat Hamishpacha is because it makes the marriage more exciting and beautiful, and it gives us like a sense of some sort of like a pattern. And you know, like this, there's a famous Gemara in source number 2 here that I have that shows us, I'm just making it bigger for you guys, that this second source here is this idea that why do we keep this halacha? Why do we have this 7-day separation? So Rabbi Meir says famously, right, because he's going to get bored of her, because the husband's going to get bored of his wife, and this way we keep some excitement in the marriage. Yeah, like it actually says it in an even more obnoxious Hebrew term. But and usually Kala teachers leave out that he's going to get bored of her part, and they just quote the like, and it's like the wedding night every month, right? And so a lot of people think that's the reason we keep this mitzvah. I would argue that's not the reason we keep this mitzvah. The reason we keep this mitzvah is because there's a pasuk in the Torah that says when a woman gets her period, she is Niddah, and therefore we separate. Just like we don't totally understand why we keep kosher, and we don't totally understand why there's shatnez, and we don't totally understand, you know, lots and lots of mitzvot that we keep. We might see meaning in some of them. You could even go so far as to see meaning in shatnez if you like, you know, learn about Cain and Hevel and how one of them was the shepherd and the flax and the whatever. Like you can find meaning in a lot of mitzvot, but that's not why we do them. Those are meanings behind them. And I think the way I would prefer to phrase it is that some of the reasons that we often give for this whole area of a halacha is more so a, not so much a reason as much as it's a benefit, right? There's a benefit that you can find. So like even talking about this example of like every time you go to the mikveh, if it's monthly for you, some women are on different types of cycles depending on the hormones they're on or whatever, but every time you go to the mikveh, it's supposed to be like your wedding night. So, okay, first of all, I don't know about you, but my wedding night is not something I would like to emulate ever again. I think it's a really bad, like sort of, you know, example of something we want to continue. But I think that this idea that there can be excitement and that the absence makes the heart grow fonder, and that we have this opportunity to reconnect, and that separating from one another gives us that sort of opportunity to like actually appreciate the physical element of our relationship could be true. But that doesn't mean that every single month going to the mikveh is going to be like all this beautiful like fireworks and like roses and everything is so lovely. Like halavai, it should always be that way, but we all know there are times when it is and times when it's totally not. So if you look at the sixth bracha of Sheva Brachos, I'm sorry, you can't see. The sixth bracha of Sheva Brachos is, it says, Sameach tesamach re'im ahuvim kesimchacha yitzircha began eden mikedem, right? Hashem should make you have simcha, re'im ahuvim. What does that mean? Friends who are lovers, or loving friends, right? And there's a lot of discussion in like this is based on a Gemara. There's a lot of discussion about what does this mean to be loving friends, right? And if you think about it, why was Chava created, right? So we have this idea in Bereshit. Adam gets created, and what does Hashem decide? Lo tov hayot ha'adam levado, right? Why does he create him a wife? This is not good for him to be alone. He doesn't say Adam needs a wife so he can make babies. He says Adam needs a wife because he needs a companion. He needs an ezer kenegdo, this helpmate opposite him. They somehow need to be able to bounce ideas off of each other and work together to help each other grow. He needs another person in his life to be his companion. And that is ultimately what marriage is really about. Not all, most species, right, of God's creations have to procreate, right? Some do it asexually, but many do it sexually. We're not unique in that we have sexual needs and sexual drives, but we're unique in that our sexual drives also come from an emotional place and also come from a place that has to do with our connection on a spiritual, emotional, psychological level. And that brings more depth to our sexual experience, as opposed to, like, it's possible to have a sexual experience with no emotional connection, but that tends to leave people, feeling not good afterwards, as opposed to it being an opportunity to come closer to each other. And this idea of this re'im ha'ahuvim, these friends who are lovers, it's like two elements of our relationship. And I think we often, when Route 70 says like a Taharat Hamishpacha refresher course, I'm not sure who's on here right now, and I am being recorded, but if she saw this, I don't think she would mind. There was someone in the shul who texted me back when I sent out a thing last week saying I was giving this course, and was like, well, I really hope that you make sure that you speak about how challenging it is and that you encourage people that they need to use the Taharat, which we'll talk about later, and you encourage me. She made like a whole list of pointers of things she thought I should talk about. She does have like therapy experience, so she's like knowledgeable about how some of these things have impacted people in their marriages and individually, but it came on a little strong, and I spent the whole day being like, I don't know, and I eventually wrote back to her and said, like, thank you so much for your feedback. You'll be glad to know that this is how I teach, but also, like, you came on a little strong. And she was so thankful that I told her that. It was like actually a really nice conversation. We're good now. And I never stand up for myself. So that was like a really big thing for like me and my own personal like therapy. But what she was saying was really interesting, right? Because she's talking about this idea that every time you hear about a Taharat Mishpacha refresher class, or we're bringing in someone to speak on this issue. So either we bring in like a really fun, cool sex therapist who like talks about like sexuality, and that's an awesome fun cheer, and like hundreds of people show up. Or we do something like this, and it's all the don't do this and don't do that and don't do that, and make sure that you remember to do this. And it's like bad, negative. And I think that sometimes we kind of miss the whole point, which is what the third class is really going to be mostly about. But we miss the whole point of like, why are we doing all of this? So why are we doing all of this? Is because we believe in the Torah and we love Hashem and we want to serve him however he told us to. We don't understand why he wants us to do this, but he wants us to do this. That's like, first and foremost, and that can be a challenge for all of us, just like a lot of other mitzvot can be a challenge for all of this, but I would argue this is probably one of the most challenging mitzvot. But aside from that, if we want to find the benefit in it and we want to find the meaning in it, then we can't only focus on the Niddah time of the month. We have to also focus on the together time of the month, which is the ahuvim part, the lovers part, but then there's also the re'im part, the friendship part. And when you are Niddah, is that an opportunity to like clean out your closet more and like live parallel lives and just like be roommates? Or is that an opportunity to like work on the friendship element of your marriage? I always think back, I always tell my fellows this, like my husband and I started dating in high school. We were not really from, we touched, then we became from, we were broken up, then we got back together when we were from, and we were not touching. And everyone said, oh, nobody's shomer together. We were really shomer together. We did not touch each other until we got married, like for real. It was really hard and it really sucked. And maybe the fact that we had touched in the past was helpful in some ways. I'm not really sure, but our relationship when we were shomer negiah and dating was emotionally deeper then. I mean, it was also like immature and like whatever, we were like in love and whatever, but it was emotionally deeper then than in some ways it is now, because we could not express our love for each other in a physical way. And we dated for a long time. There were a few breakups in between, but we were not allowed to get married when we wanted to. It was like a long process. It wasn't like we dated for 3 months and got married and like didn't have to deal with it, right? So we were dating for a long time and we couldn't touch each other. So we had to actually use our words to express our feelings. And that doesn't necessarily come naturally to my husband. It doesn't come naturally to me. I'm probably better at it than he is, but like, he's a really not like an emotionally expressive person. So that was a really big challenge for us. And then once we got married, we kind of forgot how to do that. We just waited till I was Tahora again. And then we could just show each other we loved each other physically. And we didn't have to figure out how to express those things in words. And sometimes I say to him, like, I wish we could go back to that, like, feeling of like being on the phone late at night, lying in bed, talking to each other and like having that connection and saying all the things we want to say, because now we don't say them, we just show them, which is very nice. And thank God we aren't still shomer negiah, right? But like, it's not, you actually lose out in some ways on that element of the relationship when you're only focused on the physical. So I just want to argue that there is some sort of benefit here of focusing on the re'im element of our relationship when we're separated. We can use that as an opportunity and sort of like a springboard for working on the relationship in other ways and playing some of those like dating games. Like John Gottman has an app called Dex and it has like different questions to ask each other to like get to know each other better. And like some of them are super hilarious and some of them are like serious, but it's just different ways to connect in a way that maybe you wouldn't necessarily like. Life can be busy between work and whatever else is going on. We don't always have a lot of time for each other. So if we make the same amount of time for each other when we're physically able to touch and when we're not physically able to touch, then what does that look like and how can that impact our marriage? So that's just something I think in terms of like benefits to be thinking about. Okay, I just want to share this quote with you guys. I need to move their names over. Okay. This is from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He wrote an article of marriage, relationship and relations. So it's not super hard English, but it's Rav Aaron, so it's not like, super easy. It is precisely in order to underscore the significance of sexual relations, in order to focus attention upon their character and consequences, that tevilah, dunking in a mikveh, was ordained. The restraints imposed sans tevilah, meaning without tevilah, are intended to assure that relations not be casual. They generate interactive awareness, which serves to ennoble and enhance sexuality, elevating it redemptively from the bestial to the human. So he's saying when we separate from each other, when we remove ourselves from each other, we're essentially putting ourselves in a position of being able to appreciate the physical relationship and to be able then to elevate it. Just like we make a bracha on our food and we take it from just being a physical exercise or a physical experience of like, we need to eat food. So now we're going to eat food. And that's how we sort of elevate food, by making it a spiritual experience, by thanking Hashem and being mindful about what we're eating. Just like we take wine and we make kiddush with wine and we elevate something that could be almost like a destructive force, like alcohol, that like humans can use for like all kinds of crazy, terrible purposes. And we turn it into something that we're using for ritual and like sort of kadosh purposes. We can take our sexuality and change it from something that's just like an animalistic drive to something that is elevated and holy, and it brings sanctity into our home, into our marriage. That doesn't make it easy, but that at least gives it some sort of religious significance that can bring meaning to the mitzvah. I think that one of the reasons why this is such a hard mitzvah, a friend of mine shared her notes with me. She's a yoetza halacha, and she has like a great analogy. She's like, I go to an appointment sometimes in Boca that's right next to a McDonald's, and I can smell the fries from McDonald's. It's like a very distinct smell, the McDonald's smell. So I grew up eating McDonald's. I am obsessed with McDonald's French fries. They are absolute garbage, I'm sure. They are so good. For all those of you who've not had them, you're missing out. McDonald's fries are amazing. So she was like, if you go and you smell fries outside McDonald's and you're like, that smells delicious, or you're outside a non-kosher bakery, like, oh, it smells so good in here, right? Or like I always find like on Pesach, I can always like smell bakeries more, So she's like, but you're not gonna feel like you would do anything to eat those fries. Like maybe some people would crave them so intensely that like they can't even like keep kosher, but most normal human beings could be like, okay, fine, I'm gonna go now to like BQK and order some fries, right? Like they're gonna figure out like a solution to sort of stay. But if you have a sexual drive, people will like do really destructive things for their sexual drives, and they will destroy relationships that matter to them for their sexual drives, and their judgment will be completely impaired by their sexual drives. And you hear about this with couples who are trying to keep halacha and who can't do it because their sexual drive is so strong and it's so hard for them. There is something innate in us that makes this a much harder mitzvah to keep, and the fact that it's done mostly in secret makes it extra hard because you don't even have like that moral support. I would argue we should be a little more open about it and talk to each other. Not like at the Shabbos table with couples and friends and kids, but like, it's okay to talk to a friend and be like, oh my God, I need it right now, and it's really annoying me. Like, that's okay. Like, don't feel like you're like breaking halacha by sharing that with one person because you need to get it off your chest. Like, that's normal and healthy and good. But it is a really, really hard mitzvah because it's secret and because it is such an innate drive. And the fact that we have that drive is a good thing. If you're experiencing a situation where you don't have that drive in this stage of your marriage, like that's something to look into. That's something to be working on, right? Like that would be a sign of your marriage being in a not okay place, not like one night or like 1 week, but like for an ongoing issue. And this is something that we can like work on and get help with. But the reason we're married to our spouse is because we're attracted to each other and we work together, and like that's why we're together. So if we're not interested, then like that's a sign of not good, as opposed to like there isn't necessarily like an inherent value in me missing the McDonald's French fries. Like maybe it makes me like, get more schar for like not eating them, but whatever. Like it's not really anything like so special that whether I like the fries or not, but like it's a good thing that I want to be with my husband. And when I can't be with him, that it's challenging for me. That's a good sign about our relationship. So it's this weird like paradox where like you're supposed to do this, but we're also happy that you have these desires, and it's a very strange experience. So I think that when you look back at that slide of everybody's answers, like there really is this sense of ambivalence that people feel, and like putting it into one word is basically impossible. That's whoever wrote depends. That was like such a good cheating way to get out of it, because like that's basically saying, right? Well, it depends, right? It depends how I'm feeling right now. And sometimes I'm able to see the beauty. For some people, the whole 12 days is really, really hard, but they love the mikvah, and that's amazing. For some people, they don't mind the 12 days, but they hate going to the mikvah. Going to the mikvah is a really hard experience for them. Everybody has like their issues or their things. So I think it's just something that we have to own it. I don't know how many of you were at Tara Ice spoke a couple of weeks ago, and she spoke about this idea also that like things are hard, and like saying they're hard is helpful. Owning the difficulty is like a healthy and helpful thing for us to just, say, oh, it's all beautiful. You know, like this is a beautiful mitzvah. Like, I think that is the most damaging thing a kala teacher can do for a kala, to tell her that every month is going to feel like your honeymoon all over again. And then the girl comes home from the mikvah, like, time number 4, time number 5, and she's like, it doesn't feel like my honeymoon. Like, I'd rather just be like in my PJs eating popcorn and watching Netflix right now. Like, what's wrong with me, right? And then she thinks there's something wrong with her marriage, and she starts to panic. But like, no, there's nothing wrong with your marriage. Like, this is hard to always be into it. It's hard to always make meaning from it. It's something you have to work on. It's something you and your husband can talk about and say, how can we make this better? If you feel no desire when you get home from the mikvah on a repetitive basis, that's something to be looking into and dealing with. But not every month is going to be perfect. And not every month are you going to be so excited to keep this mitzvah. Like, it's not exciting. Everybody's more excited when their period doesn't show up, right? We have to own that this is hard. So I just wanted to sort of introduce with that. And now we're going to get into all the things you have to do. But I think it's just important for us to own it, to talk about it, to share those feelings with each other, and not feel like there's something wrong with us or we're alone because we don't see meaning. And sometimes people sometimes ask me to teach kalas who are like completely not religious, and I don't like doing it because I don't know how to like make it sound nice. Because I'm like, no, this is hard. And that doesn't always work for people who don't really feel like doing this, right? You have to be committed to Torah in order to be keeping this mitzvah. And if you're not, and you're just doing it because it's meaningful, and that's the reason you're doing it, meaning can fall away, and then like you're not sure why you're doing it anymore. So it has to, at the end of the day, be because the Torah said so as your starting point. Okay. Oh, now you're not letting me switch slides. Okay, so now we're up to part 2, the what's. Okay, how do you become or avoid becoming a Niddah? Okay, so there are 5 ways a person can become Niddah. So there's actually 6, but the first one is like the first time you have sexual intercourse. We're not going to talk about that because it's not applicable to people who are at this stage of life. Okay, 5 ways a woman can become a Niddah. So the first one is your period or a flow. Then we're going to talk about staining. Then we'll talk about Safek Hargasha activities. We will define what that means. Then we're going to talk about gynecological procedures, and then childbirth or miscarriage. Okay, so those are basically the 5 ways that a woman can become a Niddah. So we'll first talk about getting your period. Okay, so being a Niddah d'oraisa, okay, from a Torah perspective, what makes you a Niddah? There are 3 things that are required to become a Niddah on the Torah level, okay? The color of the blood needs to actually be a problematic color. The Mishnah talks about different shades of red, and like this one's okay and this one's not okay, but already by the time of the Gemara, they're already saying like, we're not sure exactly which red is this and which red is that and what red they were referring to, so we're just going to say red, bad, okay? Which is honestly better, because like if we all had to have like some sort of paint wheel in our houses that we were like comparing to, I'm not sure I would want to deal with that. No joke, my Kala teacher did have paint samples like from Home Depot that she used during Kala class to like show us different examples, and she also used Svarim on her Svarim shelf. It's like, you know how like the Art Scroll Gemara is like a brownish burgundy-ish color, and then like, so she used like the Svarim on her shelf. She's like, okay, that's safe or bad, that's safe or good. So she, I did find that helpful, but when red is a problem, the Gemara also refers to black as a problem. Most people assume that means like very, very deep red. If you see something that's literally black, please call your medical professional. I don't think that's like something most people usually see. You might see a very, very dark red, but that if you see black, like go to the doctor. Other than red and black, any other kind of discharge a person could see isn't necessarily considered blood. And this is also true for brown. So this is a really, really important concept that a lot of people kind of get hung up on. They just assume that brown is a problem. So let's say it's the last day of their period and they see some brown. They're like, oh, I can't do my hefsek, which we'll define later. I can't do my hefsek because I'm still bleeding. But if it's totally brown and it's not a shade of red, then you would be okay. So the question is, how do you decide if it's a shade of red or a shade of brown? So if you can look at it and you can feel like objectively, I see this as red or I see this as brown, you can make that judgment call yourself. Brown is fine, red is a problem. It's the burgundy maroon situation that's going to be problematic. But oftentimes that's where people kind of get caught up. And I think that most women, not all, but most women err on the side of caution and are strict with themselves. And I just really want to encourage people to ask questions. I know it's an uncomfortable thing, but I can't tell you, like, there's a baby in this community who exists because I convinced somebody to ask questions about brown. Just really, like, I know it's weird. I totally get it. I probably told the story to some of you. The first time I ever had a question was during my 7 clean days before my wedding. My husband was already back in Toronto. I was living in New York. We were in the Heights. I called him. I was like, I did a badika and I'm really not sure. I don't know what to do. And he's like, call Rav Simon, who is like the rabbi that we still call with our questions. It was his rabbi at the time. And I was like, okay, like, this is so weird. I don't know what I'm going to do. So Rav Simon apparently doesn't have it anymore, which is so sad. He used to have like a makom kavua in the YU library. He had a table on the 5th floor. It was like books up to Shemayim of like everything he was learning. Like he had all the most obscure books ever. It was like the 5th floor of the YU library is like where all the like weird Jewish books are that nobody knows what they are. Rav Simon had them on his table, okay? And I call him and I'm like, I'm getting married next week and I just did a badika and I'm really not sure. Like I was wondering if you'd be able to look at it. He's like, no problem, meet me on the 5th floor of the library. So I put it in an envelope with like my phone number. I figure I'm gonna like slip it to him, you know, and like that's gonna be the end of it. He'll call me later. He's like, come with me. He goes in between the stacks. He opens it up and he starts looking at it. Like I'm standing there and I'm in the YU library. Like we're talking like YU, like a yeshiva, boys, only boys, very few girls everywhere. And he's like looking at my badika cloth and I'm standing right next to him and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm gonna die right now. Like just like I need to like just like that's it, like I'm done. And I was so mortified. And I really believe Hashem sent me that experience because he knew I was gonna be a college teacher. Like I needed to be able to say like, it's so weird, but I'm still here, you know, like I survived. And he looked at it and he's like, this is totally fine. If you see this color again and you won't ask me about it again, you come back as many times as you want, but if you keep seeing this color, don't worry about it. And it was like a weird brown color, whatever, fine. We proceeded to live in the Heights for a few months. We came back to him, at least by then, I was in New York, and I would just send them with him to shear, and he would just give them to him in shear. So that was a little better. I never had such an intense interaction with him again. And then we went to Israel for 2 years and we moved back to the Heights and we lived in his building. And I had a Shiloh one time and I went to him with my Shiloh. And of course he brought me into his apartment and his wife was there making dinner and his kids were there. And I was like, oh my God. And his wife was like, hey, how are you? Like it probably happens 100 times a day. She doesn't even like think anything about it. I was mortified. Okay. But I got my answer. So like, am I saying everybody should like go to Rav Simon in the library? Don't do it. But I will happily take your badika class to Rav Simon in the YU library or to any other rabbi you need. There's also a great app called Taharat, which is really great if you're traveling or like on the, like unable to access a rabbi. It is like, it's Rivka Bloom. Also, for those of you who don't know Rivka Bloom, she lives in our community. She's a genius. She went to MIT and basically has taken all of her like computer science training and like made the world of Taharat Hamishpacha accessible to women. It's like, so cool. She's so cool. So she created this app that somehow deals with the issue, I don't understand how, of like different color settings on different phone screens. So like if I just take a picture on my phone and send it to you, it might look different on your screen than it does on my screen. And then like you can't send that to a rabbi and he can't like reasonably make a ruling from a picture on a cell phone screen because how do we know that our colors are the same? Somehow this app deals with those issues. And there are rabbis on the app who are really reputable. Rabbi Davis is one of them. Rabbi Alman, who is one of the poskim for Nishmat in America, is on there. And I personally don't think it's a great first resort. I think person to person, if possible, is better, especially if you're dealing with any kind of fertility issues or whatever, and you want to have like a relationship with like a person who knows you and who knows what's going on, who can like help advise you. I do think that's better. But if you're not comfortable bringing it to my mailbox or to the Wine Sox mailbox or to the Dropbox, the anonymous Dropbox outside of our mikvah, if none of those options are going to work for you, you don't want to talk to me about it, you don't want to talk to anyone, use the Taharat app. It's like an amazing resource that's available to women now that did not exist a few years ago, so it's a good thing to know about. It's spelled Tahor. So that's just in terms of colors, okay? The blood has to be from your uterus. If you know for sure that the blood is not from your uterus, then also that would not make you a Niddah. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about staining, but we're now in the realm of being a Niddah on the Torah level, okay? So on the Torah level, it has to be red or black, and it has to be from your uterus, and it also needs to be accompanied by what's called a hargasha, which is a sensation, which is a kind of bizarre concept for most people nowadays. There are different understandings exactly. I was reading my friend's notes today. It was really interesting. It said that most of the early sources just talk about a hargasha as if everybody knows what they're talking about. And then sometime during the late Rishonim, early Achronim, rabbis start being like, what is a hargasha anyway? And they start discussing it. There seem to be different understandings. Either it's a feeling of blood moving like through your cervix, like your cervix opening and the blood moving from your uterus down. We're not talking about feeling blood in your underwear. That's not a hargasha. We're talking about some kind of sensation inside your body that indicates that your period has begun. Some people talk about like a shiver going up your spine or some kind of very clear like feeling inside your body. Most women nowadays do not have those, but there are women who say they have experienced them. So it's likely that there's just something about not being as in tune with our bodies nowadays, and that's why not all of us know what they are. For all intents and purposes, it's not really halakhically significant because if you have a full-on period, like you're flowing, not like questionable, but I'm spotting a little, whatever, but you have your period, we assume you had a hargasha from a halachic perspective, so you're considered a Niddah D'oraisa anyways. So the only reason to know about a hargasha thing is because if you spot and you had a hargasha, that would make you a Niddah regardless of how much blood there was. But if you have your period, you're a Niddah D'oraisa, you're a Niddah on the Torah level regardless. It doesn't matter whether you felt the hargasha or not. Some rabbis say cramps are hargasha, some rabbis say cramps are not a hargasha. So like it gets a little bit complicated, but just to be aware that if you ever have a hargasha that you know to be a hargasha, and then you only find a little bit of blood, that's a much more complicated situation than regular spotting, which we'll talk about in a second, which usually is not accompanied by a hargasha. So it's just something to be aware of. If you think that happened to you, call a yoetzet, call a rabbi, you can ask the rabbi if you don't want to talk to the rabbi, and describe what happened so that you can kind of work that out. Oftentimes people who have hargashas have them regularly. So they sort of know like, oh, every time I get my period, I feel this feeling, like I feel the blood moving through like my cervix, like I feel my cervix opening. They'll say they have this feeling, so they know what it is because like it happens regularly. If it happens like once in a blue moon, you may not even know it happened. You won't necessarily make the connection, but if you think you make the connection, it's worth looking into. Okay, so that's basically getting your period. To have your period and you're sure it's your period, you're Niddah. There's nothing we can really do to help. Okay. Staining can make you Niddah rabbinically, and then I wrote underneath, but it shouldn't happen often. Why do I say it shouldn't happen often? Okay, so there are 4 situations where Chazal did not apply the rule of staining making you Niddah on a rabbinic level. Okay, so when I say staining, that obviously gets really complicated. There are different sort of exact definitions. Reb Simon always asks how many quarters, like a quarter of a coin, worth of blood did she see in her pad? I'm like, I don't know. I'm always asking him, how many quarters did you see? And I don't even know what that means. Like, it's a very hard thing to define. My friend who's a yoetzet says that if you can like go out and run a few errands for a few hours without a panty liner and not be worried that you're gonna like leak all over the place, like you're staining, you're not flowing. Like if you need a pad, you're probably not staining. That's like, and again, this is a judgment call because some women have very light periods and some women have much heavier periods. So their definition of what staining looks like for them may be a little bit different than somebody else who always has a light period. But that's why it's also important to sort of pay attention to these things. And if you're not sure, to ask. Never assume you're Niddah if you think you might not be. Don't call yourself Niddah unless you're sure. It's not worth it. It's worth having the awkward conversation because I can tell you, I would say like I'm at like an 80% point right now where like I'll call mostly Rabbi Simon because he's very lenient, and I call him a lot and I ask him questions, and like 8 times out of 10 he tells me that the woman is fine, she's not Niddah. So they call me saying, oh, I'm sure for sure Niddah, this and this happened, and I'm like, hold on, let's ask, let's see, tell me what you know. And then I ask, and a lot of the time nobody's calling me saying I got my period today, am I Niddah, right? Like that's not the question. So once it gets complicated, it's complicated. So ask the question because you don't know, but you may end up saving yourself from 5 days of waiting and 7 days of Shiva Nikiyim and a mikvah if you just wait out the spotting for 3 days. So it's worth asking. So Chazal said that spotting can make a person Niddah on a rabbinic level, but then they also applied 4 scenarios where that wouldn't be true. And you only need one of these scenarios to apply. You don't need all 4, okay? So the way I like to describe it, I think I said this last year on my Zoom class, but let's say I'm the president and I say like every Tuesday, everyone has to wear like a blue shirt, okay? I make that the rule. Don't worry, I can't be the president, I was born in America. And I'm not American. Let's say I say, okay, that's the law. Everybody has to wear a blue shirt on Tuesday. I feel like Congress would pass that faster than like anything else that's like going on in the government. Because it's like so not an issue. And then I say, but on the 4th Tuesday of every month, you don't have to wear a blue shirt. You can wear whatever shirt you want. So nobody's going to say on the fourth Tuesday that you're breaking the law, because they know that built into the law is this exception to the law. So when the rabbis came and said spotting can make a person niddah, because it's very complicated sometimes to know when you're spotting and when you're flowing, and people don't always know. So they said like spotting can make you niddah. So they were putting a fence around a very serious Torah level prohibition, just like we have rabbinic fences around Shabbos and rabbinic fences around kashrut, like chicken being like fleshig, even though it's really meat that's fleshig, right? We have all of these examples of times where the rabbis added things on as fences around the Torah law. So this is another example of that, but they also were weighing the competing value of a husband and wife being together, which is a mitzvah. It's not just mitzvah to make babies, it's a mitzvah for husband and wife to be sexually together with each other and to enjoy each other. So what do you do if you're saying, well, like, let's make people need an extra, but you also have this mitzvah of like a sexual connection, right? So how do you weigh that? So they basically were like, okay, listen, we can't just say spotting's no problem, because what if somebody's like really on the cusp and they're like kind of spotting, kind of not, we can't just say spotting's not a problem, but we're going to include these loopholes. They're not great, it's not a great term, but we're going to include these loopholes so that, you know, it's the fourth Tuesday of the month, you can wear whatever shirt you want today. It's okay. So if you spot, but you find it on colored underwear or on a colored towel or colored bed sheets, you can ignore that, right? So that's where those loopholes come in. So people often feel like they're cheating, but you're not cheating, because the same people who made this law also gave you these exceptions. So it's not cheating, it's there to help you out. So what are the four situations? Okay, the first one is what I mentioned. If the stain is on colored clothing or sheets, you can ignore it. Now, again, if it is a flow, you cannot just wear purple underwear and like pretend that it's all good, right? Okay, we're talking about stain here. If it's on colored clothing or sheets or towels or whatever, you can ignore it. So therefore, I wrote like in very, oh, it's not working. There we go. In red, don't wear white when you don't have to, okay? Like I can't even begin to tell you how many times I get these crazy questions. I had a color once who had striped sheets, and it was like blue stripe, white stripe, blue stripe, white stripe. She'd only been married a couple months. It was her husband's old sheets from his dorm, and she had her old sheets from her dorm, and they had pushed their beds together. They each still had twin sheets, and they had been like, every Sunday they were supposed to go to Bed Bath & Choose sheets, and they hadn't made it there yet. And they had sex the night before, and she rolled over and slept on his bed and woke up in the morning and there was blood on his sheets. But the spot was big enough that it was like on the blue and on the white. And so then she calls me like freaking out, like, oh my God, on my side of the bed, it's not white, but on his side of the bed it is white. And I forgot and I fell asleep there, and like, you're gonna kill me, you're gonna kill me, you're gonna kill me. And then of course, like when I called Rabbi Simon with her question, he was like, you should really teach your colors. I was like, I did, you know, like I told her, and she knows. But what happened was she spotted on the white stripe of the sheet. In the end, it was like, I think I was still in New Jersey. She was living in New York City. She took pictures of it with like quarters next to it so that we could like get a sense of how big the stain was on the white. It was like a whole ordeal. Then the sheets like went down the garbage chute of her apartment building because she was so upset at herself. And then he like asked about the size again. She's like, I don't have them anymore. They went down the garbage chute. It was like such a balagan, this whole thing. In the end, I think that she was good, if I can remember correctly. We're going back like 6 years now. And Baruch Hashem, she now has 3 kids, so like everything worked out. But she felt so dumb that she slept on these sheets that weren't even solid white. They were just striped, and like things didn't work out well. So it's just something that, like, yes, of course, like it's not halacha that you can't have white sheets, and it's not halacha that you shouldn't wear white underwear when it's not your 7 clean days, but like you're just asking for trouble. And even if at this stage of your life you're not spotting a lot, many women say that as they approach menopause, they start to have a lot of spotting. So it's something that you may not be experiencing now, but it's just something to be aware of. If that starts happening for you, get rid of the white underwear then. Any underwear that's like colored but has like a white like piece of fabric sewn in, it's called the gusset apparently. That thing, if that's white, it's also going to be a problem for you because that's exactly where your spotting is going to show up. So it's just something that you're just asking for trouble. Some people are so crazy about this that when they go to hotels, they bring their own sheets and towels. I'm not that crazy. If I go to a hotel, I take a risk. I use the white sheets because like the whole point of going to hotels is that I don't have to make the bed. I'm not bringing my own sheets. But if I was having a lot of spotting issues, I would definitely bring my own sheets, right? So it's something that it's a personal comfort thing of how risk, averse or risk taking of a person you are. But just be aware, there are many people who will tell you, I never have spotting issues. I never have spotting issues. And then like the one time they wear something white and then whatever. So it's just something to be aware of. It's very good advice to avoid white linens, to avoid white underwear unless you need to, okay? So that's on colored clothing or sheets. And again, you only need one of these things to help you when you're spotting. The next one is if it's on something that is not mikabel tuma, which means it cannot contract impurity from a halachic perspective, which is basically synthetic things or things that are attached to the ground. So for example, a toilet is installed in the floor or in the ground, that can't contract tuma by definition. I don't know many details about like the laws of tuma and tara because we don't live nowadays with those laws, but apparently this is part of those details. And if you find blood inside the toilet, it's probably okay because it's attached to the ground. However, if it's a lot of blood or it's the beginning of a period, that's a different story. But if you find just a tiny bit of blood inside a toilet, you're probably okay. You can ask a question. If you find blood on toilet paper, if you find blood on a panty liner, these are things that are actually considered not mikabel tuma. They cannot contract tuma, according to most opinions. So therefore, you could ignore that blood. That goes so far as saying, like, if you know you're having spotting issues, you could wear panty liners in order to sort of save yourself. This is where you get into these really awkward, like, am I cheating? Am I not cheating? What's the deal? What does Hashem want from me here? It's like very uncomfortable. I have asked this question a number of times. I asked once about a kala of mine who always wears panty liners. She feels like really gross without them. She can't stand not wearing a panty liner. And she was like, what am I going to do during my 7 clean days? Like, I can't go without a panty liner. So I asked for her and she was told that she could wear one. They said, and I was like, well, what if she ends up staining on the panty liner? They were like, it's on a panty liner, she could throw it away. And I was like, but it's the 7 clean days. And they were like, she's wearing a panty liner. I was like, but it's the 7 clean days. And they were like, anyways, goodbye. So these are these things where we have to always remember that the halachic system wants us to not be Niddah extra, wants us to stay out of Niddah. It's not looking to get us. Oftentimes people feel like the rabbis are out to get me. They want to, they don't care. They would be very happy for you. You know, like somebody was saying to me the other day, like, oh, the mikvah, we need more people to come and needs to make more money. I was like, listen, I hope people aren't using the mikvah because they found a birth control method that's working really well for them and that's going great and like they're good. Like if the mikvah brings money into the shul or at least breaks even, that's really all we really want is for us to not lose money on the mikvah. Lovely, you know, but like I'm not looking to like, we need to get more people at the mikvah, so let's make them Niddah more so they can use the mikvah more. Like nobody's thinking like that, right? So it's just to be aware that this is not our goal. Okay, if it is smaller than what's called a grist shell pull, which is basically like an old school bed bug, which apparently was about the size of either a penny or maybe a nickel, according to some opinions. So if you're on the cusp of just over a penny, it's worth asking because there are some opinions that go a little bigger than a penny. Basically, if the spot is smaller than a penny, you can ignore it, even if it's on white. So during your 7 clean days, if you're wearing white underwear and you find just a tiny little spot of blood on your underwear, that would be something you could ignore. If you find multiple small spots that sort of came out separately and you've got like one little dot here and one little dot here and one little dot here, you do not need to combine them. They can each exist as separate spots. But if they are combined and it's sort of like some is like more of a brown color and some is more of a red color, but it's like one big kind of mush, that gets a little more complicated. That's where you have to start asking questions. So that's just something to be aware of. So we've got, if it's on colored clothing or sheets or whatever, if it is on something that is not mikabel tuma, if it is smaller than a penny, and the last one is if you can attribute it to something else. So let's say you got a pap smear today, or let's say you were painting with your kids and there was a lot of red paint everywhere and now you found red paint on yourself and you think, you know, now again, if it's on your underwear and it's not on your skirt, kind of hard to make that argument, although my kids managed to get things in the most crazy of places, so you really never know. But the Gemara gives an example of a woman who works in a slaughterhouse, right? And she finds blood on herself because she works in a slaughterhouse. She can assume that the blood came from the slaughterhouse. Even if she thinks it really might have come from her, she's allowed to attribute it if it's a reasonable attribution. If you think you have a cut internally from doing a badika, let's say, or for some other reason, that would also be something you could attribute to. Because if you have a cut in your vaginal walls or on your cervix, that is not your uterus. That is not blood from your uterus. That can't make you Niddah. So if you know for sure that there's a cut, that would be something that you could attribute it to. So that's why knowing how to find a bodeket locally. We don't have one in Hollywood, but there's one in Enemy and there's one in Boca and Miami Beach. So if you ever need a bodeket is a female from medical professional of some kind who's taking some additional halakhic training and being able to identify things that often a medical professional would not necessarily even notice. Like if you go to your gynecologist and they're doing an internal exam and be like, do you see a cut in there? They might be like, no, I don't see anything. because it could be so small and so like standard that like people have stuff like that all the time and it doesn't have any medical significance, so they don't really notice it. But a bodeket will look very, very carefully and say, oh, I see a cut right there. That's where that blood came from. Now you can ignore it. So if you ever have an ongoing issue where you're doing badikas, you keep finding blood on the same spot and it feels a little painful in there or whatever, first of all, we should cut down on the number of badikas. That's definitely worth the conversation. But also going to bodeket may really like make or break your whole like 7 clean days. So it's worth knowing how to find one. If anyone here is a medical professional and would like to get trained in becoming a bodeket, I don't think there's anyone here in Florida who does the training, but let's hook you up so we have someone in Hollywood because that would be awesome. Yeah.
You said that if it's like, what if it's like a polyp or I don't know any other medical term, but is that considered?
So if the polyp is causing you to bleed from your uterus,
From the uterus.
that's where you have an issue. Yeah, it has to be that you can attribute the blood to being not from your uterus.
Okay.
So you have a cut like on your labia or a cut in your vaginal canal or a cut on your cervix. That would be where that would be an issue. If any of these terms are not familiar with you, I didn't like bring, I have a pop-up book that I used when I teach college. It's like really cute. I can like do a badika on the 3D vaginal canal. I can like show them male anatomy. It's like an old school, it's like out of print. But if any of these terms are not familiar to you, I really encourage you to go home and like do a little bit of research on female anatomy. If anything in the Jewish news over the past few weeks has taught us anything, it's that we should know our anatomy and we should teach it to our children, and we should use clear words, and we should not use euphemisms, and we should make sure our kids have the language that they need to be able to talk about their body parts. And your sexual health is very much related to your ability to know and speak about your body. So I encourage you to learn about it. We're not covering that today. I'm not a sex ed teacher, but I just wanted to give a little plug for that because I think it's really important. Okay, so just a quick review. What makes you a Niddah rabbinically? You are Niddah rabbinically if you are staining, but as long as one of those 4 things applies, then you're still in the game. That's what I like to call it. You're still in the game, okay? So either it's on colored fabric, or it's on something that can't be makabel tuma, or it's smaller than a penny, or it can be attributed to something else, then even though you're staining, you're good to go. So what do you do? So if you are currently staining, the general halachic advice is that you should refrain from having relations for 24 hours just to see, is this going in the bad direction or is this going in a good direction? That being said, if you have an ongoing staining issue, this is worth having a conversation about, because if you have a medical reason why you're staining, or you can't, I wouldn't recommend just like jumping into bed, but I would have a conversation with a rabbi or a yoetza about maybe that advice not applying in your specific scenario just based on what's going on with you. So it's just good to know that isn't really halacha, it's just very, very good halachic advice, because oftentimes if you're staining, it can be the beginning of something more, and then you could be actually in bed and find something, and that will be a very, first of all, uncomfortable situation, and also just like halachically uncomfortable. So it's something that it's just a good advice.
Sorry, questions. Sorry,
No, questions are good.
Right, just to clarify, any of those 4 like
Loopholes, yeah.
loopholes, whatever, but if the blood is red.
If the blood is red and it's on colored fabric, you ignore it.
So
If the blood is red and it's less than a penny, you ignore it. It doesn't matter that the blood is red. If the blood is not red, then it's also fine. If you're on wearing white underwear and the blood and the discharge comes out and it's not red, it's brown, you ignore that because it's brown. So that's not an issue. We're talking about red blood that in order to become a Niddah on a rabbinic level, it needs to be red blood on white fabric, more than the size of a penny. The fabric has to be like not synthetic, which don't wear synthetic underwear. That's not healthy. And
you know that for your period.
sorry?
Or you have a light period.
Right.
You know your period.
Yeah, if you know it's your period, yeah, okay. But if some people will be like, I know this is my period, and it's really not. So like, just don't be so sure of yourself. Ask questions. I had a situation once with somebody who did that. They put a tampon in, they never ended up bleeding, and then the tampon made the Niddah, and it was like so sad. So just don't put in a tampon until you're absolutely sure, and just like, don't call yourself Niddah until you're sure. Okay, next section. Safek hargasha activities. We spoke about hargashas before, the sensation that a person can feel when they're getting their period. Okay, a safek is a doubt, and a hargasha is the sensation. So a safek hargasha is activity. Is it something that a person does that causes them to miss a hargasha or to miss a potential hargasha? Okay, so it's an activity that a person does that can cause them to, that can cause them to basically get themselves into this like iffy place of like, they're not in rabbinic Niddah mode right now. They're kind of more in the Torah level Niddah mode, where it's not clear whether they had this hargasha, and if they did have the hargasha, then we can't apply the leniencies of the rabbis because they're no longer in the camp of just staining. Once you have the hargasha, even a tiny little drop of blood makes you a niddah d'oraita. So those three activities are urination, sexual intercourse, and a badika or any other kind of like something inserted vaginally, like a tampon or a douche or a gynecological something going on. Just don't look after your doctor's done checking you. Just like, don't look at the speculum or whatever. Just don't look. Okay. Somebody the other day was telling me he had shoulder surgery and he like wanted to watch it so badly. I was like, I cannot relate to that at all. But definitely the gynecologist, like, don't look. Even if you're interested, don't look. Unless you're already Niddah, and then you don't care, I guess, but whatever. Okay, so so the urination, what do we do about urination? So we're concerned that if you go to the bathroom and you make a pee and you then find blood immediately afterwards, maybe you had a hargasha right before you found that blood, and now you can't just ignore that blood and say like, oh, it's on toilet paper, so it's rabbinically fine. So what do? You wait. Okay, as long as there's been a significant enough pause, and I've heard from as little as 5 seconds to as much as 15 seconds in terms of different opinions about how long the pause should be. Then if you find blood on the toilet paper, then you can be like, oh, that only happened after I was done urinating. So like there was no hargasha for sure. This is rabbinic. Okay, so how do you get yourself to wait? This was advice given to me when I was being trained to be a Kala teacher by Lior Bednar. She was Yoetza Halacha in Israel. And she said you should do your Kegels while you're sitting on the toilet, after you finish peeing and before you wipe. If you don't know what Kegels are, Google them. Everybody should do them. They're very important for your sexual health. They're very important for like pre-pregnancy, post-pregnancy, anything related to that. And as we age, we all need to be having strong pelvic floors. So my mom tells me stories about her and her friends all the time. I'm like, Mom, I don't want to hear about your friend's pelvic floor. So do your Kegels now before it's too late. That's what my mom always tells me. But it's a good opportunity. You go to the bathroom hopefully a number of times a day. If every time you do like 4 or 5 Kegels while you're sitting on the toilet, you'll get your good amount of Kegels in each day, and you'll make sure to pause in between going to the bathroom and wiping. Okay, so that's my suggestion about urination. Relations. Right after you have sex, do not go looking. Okay, don't look. Don't use like a light colored towel or whatever to wipe up. Your husband should not go looking. You should not go looking. If you need to go to the bathroom afterwards, which I strongly recommend in terms of like urinary health and whatever, just don't go looking. Try not to look, because if you find something immediately after sex, it is the same issue that maybe we covered up a hargasha and now that blood, we don't know. As long as there's been a couple of minutes in between, if you were like lying in bed and then you went to the bathroom, then that would be okay. But if you like turn the lights right on and like check everything right after having sex, like that, you're asking for trouble. So just don't go looking, okay? My husband just sent me a message. You need to turn on the alarm call for instructions. I told you he was gonna, I don't know how to lock the building. Okay, badika. So if you're doing a badika, this is the one where I really just can't help you. Meaning I can give you advice about peeing, I can give you advice about sex, I can't give you advice about a badika. The point of the badika is that you're taking a badika cloth, you're inserting it inside yourself, and you're looking to see if you have blood there. So if you find any blood, the most important thing to remember here is that a stain on a badika cloth, even if it's smaller than a penny, is a problem. Any red on a badika cloth, it has to be red, right? Brown is fine. Don't assume brown is bad. Don't use the term clean badika. Use the term good badika, okay? Because lots of good badikas are really gross looking. They are not clean, okay? It's not a clean badika, it's a good badika. If you find any red on a badika cloth, you're out of the game, because the whole point of the badika cloth is that we're looking for it. And we assume that while you were doing the badika, you might have missed a hargasha, and then you wouldn't be able to attribute that little bit of blood to something rabbinic, and therefore it's a problem. So a stain on a badika cloth is a problem no matter what. Oh, look, I forgot to finish my sentence. There you go, guys. That's just really important. So the 3 Sefek Hargasha activities: urination, relations, and a badika. A tampon is like a badika. It counts like a badika. That's that story I told about somebody before who thought she had her period, stuck a tampon in, went to work for the day, came home. There was like no blood on it. There's like a tiny drop of blood on it. And then she never got her period again. And then she called me like 4 days later. It's like, so I was like, well, the good news is you already basically done your 5-day wait. So, but it was not fun. We will talk about the 5-day wait next week. Okay. And then I wrote here, don't use a tampon unless you're sure you're Niddah already. See, I thought of all these things. Okay, gynecological procedures is the next way a person can become Niddah. This is a very, very basic principle, but if your uterus, your cervix is opened more than 12 millimeters, I almost said millimeters, that makes you Niddah automatically. Any standard OBGYN procedure in the office, like a pap smear or like anything very basic, is not a 12 millimeter device. Even an IUD is not considered 12 millimeters, okay? So we're talking about fairly significant cervical opening that usually you will know about the procedure in advance. You'll have an opportunity, so make sure you ask your doctor, should I expect to see bleeding after this procedure? Where would that blood be coming from if I saw bleeding after this procedure? And then you can go to a halachic authority, either a yoetzet or a rabbi, and say to them, I'm having this procedure done. The doctor said this and this is going to happen. Do you think it's going to make me Niddah? Should I schedule it when I'm already Niddah? Should I schedule it when I'm not Niddah? And get advice about what to do, okay? Your standard gynecological visit isn't going to make you Niddah, okay? Pap smear is not going to make you Niddah. Pap smear, they're scraping the cells off the surface of your cervix. They are not going into your uterus at all. So even if you spot a little bit afterwards, that residual spotting is coming from your cervix. It's not coming from your uterus, so you can ignore it. I wouldn't wear white. I wouldn't recommend doing it during your 7 clean days if you can avoid it. And if you do, don't do a badika that day because you're just looking for trouble, but you can ignore it. Okay, that's gynecological procedures. Okay, miscarriage. I just want to say, before I talk about miscarriages from a halachic perspective, miscarriages, unfortunately, are very normal, and we are all here for you, and just please not to suffer in silence. I just heard another story about a person who kept it to themselves for a very, very long time and was really, really struggling, and I just really encourage people to open up. I'm not saying you have to share it on Facebook. I don't think that's necessarily helpful, and maybe it is for you, but tell a few friends, tell people in your community, get the support you need. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you, that you're having a hard time moving forward. It's a very painful and terrible thing that people go through, and we just all need to be sensitive to it. And I think I speak for everyone on this Zoom and in this room that if anybody is going through it, we are here for you. And if you want support, please come to us so that we can help you. We can only help you if we know. And so please do share with your community. In terms of practically Niddah-wise with miscarriage, if it's 40 days from conception, we just treat it like a normal period. If it's more than 40 days since conception, it gets a little complicated whether it was a boy or a girl. Usually people don't know the gender, in which case we just assume it was a girl. And so you can't go to the mikvah less than 14 days after you initially started bleeding, which means if you had your miscarriage, you likely will bleed for a couple of days anyway. So practically this doesn't usually create such a long wait, but you would wait until the 15th night to go to the mikvah. So on day 7, you could do a hefsek and you could have a 7 clean days. You would just need to wait those 7 days before the hefsek. You can still do your shivanakiyim during those 14 days. You just can't go to the mikvah until the 14 days are over. If you knew it was a boy, then actually you'd be allowed to go to the mikvah after 7 days. Why is this true? It's a whole conversation about the potential for life in the woman, potential for life in the daughter, and whatever. But the more important point is just in terms of that practical, having any practical impact on us, that would be where it applies. And for the most part, I think people still are bleeding a little bit. Although if you have a DNC, sometimes that reduces the amount of blood that you're going to see. And so you may be done bleeding faster. So you do need to wait until day 14, or really day 14 at night, which is day 15. Okay, childbirth. I'm not going to go into the whole thing about when you become Niddah during childbirth, because there's a zillion different opinions, but make sure you ask. I also always encourage people to ask, not at week 40, but have a conversation with whoever you want to ask a couple weeks before you're expecting, and also ask for advice about getting to the hospital. I know in Highland Park, we didn't know this until it was too late, but there was this cab company that had an arrangement with Baker Holland that you could call them up and the cab would take you to the hospital and they would bill Baker Holland, and you could just call Baker Holland the next week and pay them back. So it's just something to be aware of and ask around in the community, ask the rabbi, what's the deal, what do people do around here when they have to go to the hospital, get some advice, and also find out when do you become Niddah during childbirth. After childbirth, as soon as you're able to, you can do a hefsek tahara. it's the same rules technically apply with the boy thing, girl thing, but like I don't think anybody's ever made it to the mikvah 7 days after having a baby, so like I'm not really worried. Although if you did, let me know, that's pretty cool. But you want to do a hefsek tahara as soon as you can. Sometimes it takes a few tries. You kind of slow down bleeding for a little while. You do a hefsek, you get like 3 days of bedikas, and like boom, you're bleeding again. So like you never know what your body's going to do. So if you can, try. And even if you haven't been cleared for having sex with your husband, I still do encourage you to go to the mikvah if your doctor is okay with it. In terms of any like stitches or incisions or whatever, that's like not my place to say. But assuming your doctor is okay with you immersing in water, I would strongly encourage you to go to the mikvah because it's just easier to be on the other side. And then if you have any spotting, you're already tahora and you can color it anywhere and you can whatever, and you can like ignore it versus like if you're still Niddah and you're trying to get a 7 clean days and you're having spotting, that's where you get into a lot more questions. So it's just easier to be on the other side. And also like harchakot wise, it's always nicer not to have those. So I encourage you to be, to go to the mikveh if you can. Okay, this is our brief crash course in Vestot, okay? I do have a chart. I should have printed, but the printer is locked behind an alarm. So I will give it to you guys later. I'll send it around. And basically, I'm going to do this quickly, but hopefully a lot of this will sound familiar once you hear it. And I'm happy to go over anything with anybody individually if they need. Okay, there are basically 2 kinds of Vestot that you need to know about. There's the Vestot Kavua, a set Vestot, and a Vestot She'eno Kavua. We're basically talking about when do we halachically anticipate that we will be getting our period, and therefore halacha requires us to separate from our spouse for that 12-hour period, either from sunrise to sunset or from sunset to sunrise, depending when you saw last month when you got your period. That time of day, that 12-hour block will be when you separate next time. If you have a Vestot Kavua, a set Vestot, that means that 3 times in a row, you saw the same pattern. And now in order to uproot that, you need to see 3 times in a row that you don't follow that pattern. Okay, when I talk about a pattern, I'll explain what that is in a second when we get to the other definitions. If you do have a Vestot Kavua, then you only need to worry about that Vestot. You only have to like follow the Vestot rules on that Vestot, and you can ignore all the other ones. If you do not have a Vestot Kavua, you have to sort of be mindful of a couple different ones, which we'll talk about in a second. So the advantage of the Vestot Kavua is it makes your life a little easier because you only have one to worry about. The disadvantage of a Vestot Kavua is it's actually much stricter. And if you forgot to do your bedika, we take that much more seriously versus a Vestot that is not set. If you forgot your bedika, we're much more lenient about that. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Nobody really gets to pick, so it doesn't really matter which one you think sounds better because your body's going to decide for you. But if I was doing like a commercial for them, you know, I could pitch them both. Okay, so that's Kavua, set, and Eno Kavua, not set. Set, you have to have the same pattern 3 times in a row. Not set means your body does something different every month. Okay, is that clear so far? Okay. Types of Vestot. Why isn't it going? Okay. So these ones are the following 3 I'm going to tell you are the most common people hear of. They're related to time, and then we'll talk about 2 other like random obscure ones because they actually do sort of apply in some ways. Okay, time-related Vestot. Your monthly Vestot, which is basically, it's called in Hebrew Vestot HaChodesh. This goes based on the Hebrew calendar month. I just was hanging out with somebody the other day and she told me she actually has this Vestot Kavua. I was like, that is crazy because the Hebrew calendar rotates 29 days and 30 days. Like each month is different, whether it's 29 days long or 30 days long. And she always gets her period on the same Hebrew calendar date, meaning like the 10th of Adar, and then the 10th of Nisan, and then the 10th of Iyar. She always gets her period on the same calendar date, which means her cycle is basically like 29-30, 29-30, which is like so bizarre. She has a Vestot Kavua for her Chodesh, so it could happen. So basically what this means is you see your period come at the same time of day, not like 9 a.m., but either in daylight hours or in nighttime hours in order to be a Vestot Kavua, a set Vestot. If it is one time in the night and one time in the day, that's not considered a set Vestot. It has to be down to the Ona. The Ona means like the 12-hour time period, either sunrise to sunset or sunset to sunrise, okay? So if you have a set Vestot, like this person, then every 9th or 10th, whatever it was, of the month, you're going to keep your Vestot that day. On that day, you're not allowed to have sex during that 12-hour period, either the nighttime hours or the daytime hours. There are different opinions. There's like, it's not basic halacha not to have any affectionate touch, but it's a very, very common stringency that a lot of couples keep and that many kala teachers teach as basic halacha, but if it's not basic halacha, touching is a stringency, but it's a very commonly accepted one that you don't touch each other. And you need to do one badika during that time period. Some people do 2, some people do 3. If you haven't been taught otherwise, just do 1. If if you have any issues from the badikas, definitely only do 1. And if you forgot to do a badika, this is where like the crux is. If you forgot to do the badika and you're this woman who has a set vesset, you cannot have sex, even if your period doesn't come that time. You cannot have sex until you do a badika, even if it's 2 days later. If you have a not set vesset and you forgot to do the badika, after the fact, we don't require you to go back and do it. Okay, that doesn't mean you should skip it on purpose, but if you forgot, you're okay. Okay, so that is the first one. It's vesset hachodesh. It's based on the Hebrew calendar date. And in order to be kavua, it needs to be the same time frame every time, 3 times in a row.
I have a question. But
Yeah.
if you actually get your period?
Yeah, then it doesn't matter because
then you don't
so
need
you
to
can,
fast,
so
right?
Rav Willig says this. He says you don't have to do the badika. You could just wait. And then if you decide your period never came and you want to resume relations, do badika now. You don't have to go looking for making yourself niddah. Although I would argue that sometimes there's a benefit. If you tend to have a short period, then like it's not bad necessarily to make yourself niddah. Like let's say you were going to get your period that night and now you did the badika like 3 p.m. Now your 5-day wait actually started a day earlier, halachically, so that can be helpful. Only if you only bleed for 4 or 5 days. If you bleed for 6 or 7 days, then it doesn't help you, right? So then you don't want to be niddah faster. We'll talk about all that next week, the 5-day wait. But I think that if you know your period's coming, you're not required to do the badika. Once you get your period, the vesset goes out the window, right? Because it doesn't matter. But this is all the time that these are going to be the most applicable is a person who is maybe just got pregnant, and so like their vesset comes and they really don't get their period. Some women are just have a weird cycle. So if you don't have a vesset kavua, you don't have a set vesset. So whatever you saw last month, you're going to keep as a vesset this month. So if last month I got my period on the 15th of Teves, Shvat today, right? Teves, I got my period on the 15th of Teves. This month during the day, then this month on the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, during the day, I did not mean to do that. During the day is my vesset. And that means that during that daytime hours, I can't have sex. I have to do a badika and I avoid affectionate touch. If you choose not to avoid the affectionate touch, you're not breaking halacha. That is a commonly accepted stringency.
That's only when we had 3 in a row.
No, so that would be, that's my vesset. And I don't have to worry about any of the other ones I'm about to tell you, like this woman I saw the other day. She only worries about the Hebrew calendar date. If I don't have a set vesset, then every month I'm going to be actually watching out for a few of them. In practice, you'll see that they often work out to be on the same day, but I'm watching out for a few of them. So what that basically means is if I saw on the 15th last month, but the month before was the 13th, and the month after that was the 16th, like the next month, whatever I saw last month, that's the day I'm going to keep a vesset this month. And every month it changes based on whatever I had happen last month. Okay. Okay, the interval vesset, this is the one that makes the most sense to us, like from like a scientific and like, modern day perspective. The interval vesset is how many days was my cycle? Okay, so if I bled on day 30 of my cycle last month, then, day 30 of my cycle this month, I'm going to keep a vesset. If I have a very, very regular period, I likely will have a vesset kavua, a set vesset for my interval, because I have my period every 28 days or every 29 days, whatever it is. So that maybe will happen. But again, it only becomes set if it's the same time of day every time. Not like exactly the hour, but it has to be during daylight hours or during nighttime hours. If I get my period every 30 days, but it like vacillates back and forth between nighttime and daytime, I don't necessarily have a set vesset. That's why mitzvahcalendar.com is such an amazing app, because you put in when you get your period what time it was, and they know where you are in the world, and they just like track it for you. You don't have to like remember all these things and keep track of them. I remember when I got married, I'm about to have my 14th anniversary. My college teacher was so wary of using the internet to track your Vestot. She's like, no, you need to know what you're doing. You need to like know what's happening. You need to understand it yourself. And what if the computer site crashes and you lose all the data? And then, and like now everyone's like, mitzvahcalendar.com, use it. So we've definitely changed our perspectives. Okay, so this interval Vestot is the number of days that your cycle was. Again, you're going to keep that 12-hour time period, whether it's nighttime or daytime, depending what happened last month, or if you have a set vesset, you're going to keep that. Intimacy is prohibited. Again, the same thing about affectionate touch, and the same thing with the badika. You should do a badika. If you forgot and it was not a set vesset, after the fact, it's okay. If you had a set Vestot, you are required to do that Badika before you can resume relations. And again, if you get your period, you don't have to do the Badika because you're Niddah anyways. Okay. Okay, time-related Vestot. This is the third kind. This is called the Ona Benoni, the average interval, which is a 30-day period according to Chazal. That's the average. We all think it's 28 days. Apparently that's a big myth. The average really is closer to 30 days in like the world average of women's cycles, but birth control pills brainwashed us all into thinking it's a 28-day cycle because it was easier to produce the packs in 4 rows, which it is. And as a college teacher, it's much easier for me to plan people's dates with the 4-row pack. But I hate when they're on the 4-day, what's it called? Placebo instead of the 7-day placebo, because I have to like do so much more math in my head to help them plot out things for their wedding. I'm like, no. Okay, so the 30th day is what is considered the average. A person only keeps this Vestot if they don't have a Vestot Kavua. If you have a Vestot Kavua of either the Hebrew calendar date, which is not so likely, but more likely the interval, this doesn't apply to you. This applies to anybody who does not have a Vestot Kavua, because we're basically saying, listen, your body's random, right? We don't know what it's going to do. Last month it did this, the month before it did that. We don't really know what it's going to do. So let's just make sure we keep a Vestot on that average date that most women would get their period, just as a way of sort of like covering our bases. So this is the one that we actually treat more stringently than the others because it's the average. And if you forgot to do this Badika, it actually is more of a big deal than forgetting to do the other ones if you don't have a set Vestot. Again, if you have a set Vestot, you're not keeping this one because it doesn't apply to you. So if you forgot to do it, you do need to do it afterwards. And you can't resume relations with your husband until you have done that Badika. Okay, it's the same thing about no intimacy and affectionate touching is avoided, but then you observe this, but you don't have to, and one Badika and all that is the same. The only difference is that the Badika must be done in order to resume relations. And again, if you get your period, it doesn't apply because you're Niddah. The thing that you should also know about this one is that there are many people who keep this one as a 24-hour Vestot. Meaning if your 30-day Ona Benoni Vestot falls out on Tuesday in the daytime, they would also keep Monday night. They keep the Ona before. It's a stringency. You don't have to do it, but it is a more commonly held stringency than some of the other ones. Some people keep all their Vestot for 24 hours, but many keep only 12 hours for the other ones, but this one we keep for 24. So it's just, if you were taught that, if your college teacher wasn't wrong, it's just different opinions about this. If it's not what you were taught, you were not required to do it. It is a stringency. Chumrah, for those of you who are more familiar with that word. Okay, 2 more slides. Vestot Haguf. Okay, this is a really weird one. Talks in the Gemara about like Vestot Kfitzo. We were talking about this recently, right? And garlic, that like if you jump, you know it'll make you get your period, or you eat spicy foods and it makes you get your period. They have all these cases in the Gemara, these like actions that you do or sort of bodily signs or symptoms. So some women will tell you like, I get this certain kind of migraine headache and I know I'm getting my period the next day. Or I get this crampiness in my back and I know I'm getting my period that night.
When I was single, I used to get a pimple in the back of my head before.
Really? I used to get on my chin.
That I used to know that they used to brush my hair. Oh,
Oh my
oh, my period. Okay.
For those of you at home, she said she would get a pimple on the back of her head before she got her period. Okay, so this is something that you kind of just have to know your body. It's not something that any textbook is going to like tell you what to look for. But if you find that you get the same symptom every month and that you can predict down to the Ona, down to daytime or nighttime, when your period's coming based on that symptom, that is a Vestot. Okay, so let's say I always get a certain kind of cramp and the next day I'm going to get my period. I know it's always like 24 hours later. It can't be like, oh, I'm cramping, I'm getting my period at some point in the next few days. That's not a Vestot. You have to be able to say like, this time frame is when my period is coming. If you can't do that, then it's not a Vestot. You don't have to worry about it. But if you do happen to have a symptom, again, like if that pimple, like I used to always get pimples on my chin before I got my period. I think I kind of still do sometimes, not as much as when I was a kid. But if I'm always would get that pimple and it would always happen a certain number of days beforehand, or is it just like oh, my period is coming in the next 3 days? That's not helpful. That's not a Vestot. We're talking about like pretty specific being able to like anticipate. I do know people who get a migraine 24 hours before or things like that. So that would be a Vestot. And if every single time you get your period, you get that Vestot, you have a set Vestot for that symptom, you can ignore all the other ones because you have a set Vestot. Okay. If it's random, you're likely probably don't even know it exists. But if it is random and you do know it exists, then on the months that it happened, then it basically just means like every time you get that headache, then you know that 24 hours later, that's going to be your Vestot. And when you don't get the headache, so you don't have that Vestot, you just have that Vestot when the symptom comes. So it's like a little bit random and hard to like qualify, but that's what Vestot Haguf means. And the final one is Vestot Hamasa. So this is actually what I was talking about before, Vestot Kfitzo, jumping, eating certain foods is something that the Gemara talks about. Why is this relevant to us nowadays? I don't think garlic is bringing on anybody's period. I'm sure there's some like health food person out there who will tell you I'm wrong, but birth control pills, NuvaRings, birth control patches, any kind of birth control that you have control over, the IUD or something like that, we don't control, but we can manipulate our cycles using hormones with a couple of different means. The most common is the pill, but there are others. That basically creates your own Vestot. So what happens when you're on a hormonal birth control, okay? Basically, we're talking about the normal combination pill, right? So your pack is gonna come with, let's call it, for my brain being not so tired, 3 rows of active pills and 1 row of placebo. There are some out there where there's different doses each week of the month. There are some out there that only have 4 days of placebo, but we're gonna go with like your standard combination birth control pill. 3 rows of active, 1 row of placebo, okay? So what happens when you finish your last active pill and you switch to the placebo is your body has a drop in the estrogen and progesterone, and that causes you to get your period. Some people it takes 24 hours, some people it takes 48 hours, some people it takes 72 hours, right? But most people who are on the pill can tell you, when I go off the pill, my period comes this many days later, right? It's usually pretty standard because it's like the exact same dose of medication every month. It's the exact same amount of hormones. So your body gets like pretty set most of the time. So basically, while you're on the active pill, we assume that you're what's called mesuleket damim. It means blood has been removed from her, which is women who are nursing, pregnant, postmenopausal. That's how the Gemara refers to women who we don't expect to get a period. While you are mesuleket damim, you don't have any Vestot because we assume you're not getting your period right now, right? So a woman on the active birth control pill, obviously that didn't exist in the time of the Gemara, but she's also like a mesuleket damim because while you're taking the active pill, you're not going to bleed. Some people can take 3 packs in a row and skip their placebo 3 months in a row and just keep on taking their active pill and they're never going to bleed. Some people will have breakthrough bleeding after a certain number of weeks of active pills. Some people can get through only 1 pack. Some people can get through 2, right? So everybody has their own thing their body does. But as long as you're on the active pill, we assume you're not going to bleed, okay? Because you're taking hormones that stop you from getting your period. Once you do the action of switching to placebo or the action of stopping the pill, whatever you want to call it, that makes you somebody with Vestot again. You like jump back into the world of Vestot. But now what's your Vestot based on? It's not based on when you got your period last month because you've been manipulating your cycle with these hormones. So it doesn't matter when you got your period last, it matters when you stop taking the pill. So once you go off that pill, you have a Vestot of either a set Vestot, a Vestot Kabu of every time I go off the pill, my period shows up 48 hours later. I go off the pill on Monday, I'm gonna have my period Wednesday morning. I go off the pill on Tuesday, I'm gonna have my period Thursday morning. Whenever I go off the pill, 2 days later, my period comes. That's your set Vestot. If that happened more than 3 times in a row, you have a set Vestot. If that means you have to do the Badika, and if the Badika, I really hope you get your period because you're on birth control, which means you're not planning on getting pregnant. So let's hope your period comes. But you do the Badika. If it's good, then you're fine. You can actually resume relations. I'm going to talk for 1 second about why these Badikas are so helpful. But in the meantime, if you didn't do the Badika, you have a set Vestot. You cannot resume relations until you've done that Badika. Again, if you got your period, it doesn't matter because now you've got to do your 7 clean days and go to the mikvah, and the Vestot becomes a non-issue. If you don't do the same thing every time you go off, sometimes it's 1 day, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's a night, sometimes it's a morning, your Vestot is whatever happened last time you went off the pill. So if you were on the pill, let's say you just took 2 packs in a row, so 6 weeks ago you last got your period. When you went off that time, it took 24 hours for your period to come, so that's the Vestot you're going to keep this time. If this time it takes 48 hours, the next time you're going to wait 48 hours. Whatever happened last time you went off the pill, that's what you're going to keep next time you go off the pill. Does that make sense? Okay. Why are these Bidikot helpful? Okay, so for the most part, many people do find that they do get their period during one of these Vestot, and then especially the interval one, or if they're on the pill, like during that time, and it's not really relevant to them. However, there are often times that people don't have such a regular cycle and they're not manipulating with hormones, and they are finding that they don't know exactly when their period's going to come, and they're just kind of in this mode of like, I think my period's coming, I don't know, and then they'll end up spending like 5 or 6 days telling their husband, I can't have sex with you because my period might be coming, my period might be coming, my period might be coming. And you think you're being so frum, but you're actually being over on a positive mitzvah of being together with your husband and also just putting extra stress on your marriage. What these Vestot do for us is they basically give us a free pass for all those other times. They're basically saying, listen, this is when we halachically expect your period to come. Any other time that we don't halachically expect your period to come, you can do what you need to do. It doesn't matter. As long as you keep the Vestot, you don't have to feel guilty about being together in between. Now that could be really weird because sometimes your Hebrew calendar month Vestot and your interval Vestot could be 2 days apart. And that means that you can't have sex on Tuesday and you can't have sex on Friday, but on Wednesday and Thursday, it's totally fine, which is totally bizarre and doesn't really make any sense. But sometimes that actually does happen. And the point is that halacha is giving us the space to not stress. Now, again, if you just went to the bathroom and thought you saw a little bit of red on the toilet paper and weren't quite sure, do I suggest jumping into bed? Like, no, not at all. But if you really don't have your period, you don't need to be in this like holding pattern of like, I'm supposed to get my period sometime this week and I don't know when it's coming, so like I'm off limits now. Like, don't do that to your marriage. Don't do that to yourself. It's not good for either of you or for your relationship. My mom, she's retired now, but she's a marriage and family therapist, which like is a funny thing because my sister and I are always very confused by that, just based on like our upbringing. But we always, she's not gonna watch this recording, it's not good. But the one really smart thing she once said to me is like, there are 3 people or 3 beings that need to be cared for in a relationship. There's the husband, the wife, and the marriage. And the marriage needs to be tended to. It needs to be treated like its own existence. It is its own being that needs to be cared for and thought about and considered what its needs are, separate from each of you as individuals. And sometimes there's conflicting needs and you have to navigate that. But don't cut yourself off from each other. You're already going to be cut off for those 12 days that you get your period and then have to do your 17 days and go to the mikvah. Don't make it extra because you're feeling anxious about when your period is going to come. Use Vestot as an opportunity to only be off limits. And if you're lucky, your Vestot or daytime Vestot, I don't know, maybe some people work nights and daytime is better for you. For most people, daytime Vestot are like, who's really like having sex at noon on Tuesday anyway. So like, great, daytime Vestot make our lives easier. Sometimes they're nighttime Vestot and those kind of suck. But at least use the Vestot as an opportunity to free your brain from the stress and the anticipation and to know that like halacha is watching out for you. You don't need to be firmer than halacha. Like halacha's got it. There's enough halachas we have to follow. We don't need to be firmer than that. And I think if that's like one of my biggest messages here, and we're going to stop with this, is just like, don't be firmer than Chazal. They didn't want us to be Niddah more than we're supposed to be. They gave us these loopholes for staining. Use them. Use the resources in your community. Speak to me, speak to Rebecca Weinstock, speak to the rabbis, call a yoetzet. I have like 4 or 5 good friends who are yoetzot. I will give you their numbers. They know way more than I do, but don't just assume things aren't good because it's uncomfortable or because you're too lazy to make the phone call. Make the phone call, ask the question. You will be surprised more times than not that you're good to go and that you can like move on with your life. And it's just so much better than just always assuming the worst and spending so much of your marriage separated from each other when you don't have to be. So I hope this wasn't too much information overload. I'm going to send all of you guys a copy of the slides because I feel terrible that the screen didn't work. Are there any questions from you guys at home?
I actually have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like 5 slides back though.
That's okay.
You said that if you do a badika
Mhm.
and there's red on the badika,
Yeah.
you're like,
Yes.
you're
Okay.
done.
If there's a cut or something like that and you can prove it, then you could ignore that blood.
But you can never ask a shaila on the color red. On
No,
the
no, no,
badika.
no. Well, you could ask a shaila on the color. Meaning, I'm not sure this is red. But if
Okay.
you're sure it's red, then that
No matter what
badika,
size, no matter anything, it's bad.
it's bad. Yeah. But again, if you're not 100% sure it's red, ask. Because like that I've seen a lot of times, like people who've been like, oh, it's for sure red, it's for sure red, it's for sure red. I'm like, just drop it off in my mailbox. Let's just see. And then it's like not red. Also, another weird thing is that the halacha is that the person who is trained in looking at maros, at looking at stains, can only look at them in the
Once
moment they
get
have it.
I know, I was gonna
right?
say, so by the time it gets
So
on the faded, it looks in the light.
yeah, like you, and so, okay, you're supposed to look in shaded sunlight, just as like a rule of thumb, like that's the most ideal light to look at a badika in. You hold it right up to the sun has a bit of red to it, so that's gonna make things look more red. Rav Simon has like some light box that's like the perfect amount of light or something, I don't know what it is, but like shaded sunlight is like the halachic principle people use to look at badikas. I see there's a question here, I'm gonna look at it in 1 second. So shaded sunlight is like definitely the best way to look at it. But again, if you do a badika and it looks kind of red to you, but by the time the rabbi sees it, it's 24 hours later and it's turned totally brown, that's not on you. Now, if you do a badika and you're like, sure it's red, I'll tell you a funny story in a second. You're sure it's red. And then you're like, I wonder what the rabbi is going to say. And you like put it in the Dropbox and he sees it 24 hours later. He's like, oh, this is fine. It's brown. And you knew it was red when you looked at it. Like, no, it doesn't work like that, right? But if you're really not sure, and there are times even today, and I'm like an expert in these areas, right? I often show things to my husband and say like, I don't know, is this bad? And he always laughs at me. He's like, how do you think this isn't good? I'm like, if somebody else showed it to me their own, I'd be like, you don't even need to ask a rabbi about this. There's no way this is red. But when it's my own, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm so nervous. I can't decide. I don't know. And then he looks at me like, well, maybe you're no gay davar. You're my husband, so you can't make the rule. You have to go bring it to someone else. And he's like, can you just chill out? Like I get so anxious also, right? But like if you're not sure, you're not sure, and it's not on you to make that decision. Ask someone else. Let it be on them. I always say this. I say this also about. I said this to somebody recently. The bugs in the lettuce. Okay, I'm very anxious about bugs in the lettuce. Okay, I have found a fair number of bugs in my romaine lettuce over the last 10 years of my life, and I'm convinced there's bugs in all the lettuce. Okay, I check my lettuce really carefully. My husband laughs at me because I'll go to the Grove and I'll just buy the lettuce off the shelf and I'm like munching on it, and he's like, what makes you think that the mashgiach who's checking the lettuce all day long is checking it nearly as carefully as you are? And I'm like, it's on his neshama, it's not on mine. Like he put his hashgacha on here. I trust the hashgacha of this place. I'm not going to go to some sketchy hashgacha I don't trust, but I trust the hashgacha of this place. They say there's no bugs in this lettuce. If they're wrong, it's on them. It's not on me. I can eat the lettuce, but like with simcha and like be fine with it, you know? So it's sort of the same thing with the badika. Like if you're really not sure, don't make it your decision. Let it be somebody else who tells you. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you it's good when you thought it was bad. My college teacher was in the GPATS program. She's now USF. She was in the GPATS program, and a friend of hers, they were learning, it's the graduate program for Talmud at Stern. They were learning Niddah, and they were learning about this idea that like whatever's in front of you, that's what you can rule on. And her friend had her period, and she went and did a badika, red, saved it for a couple days, brought it into the rabbi. I was like, I was wondering what you thought about this. And he was like, totally fine. She's like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, I did this when I had my period. It was red blood. And he's like, okay, but I'm looking at it now and all I see is brown. And so like, but again, halacha trusts us as women to make decisions about our halachic standard. Halacha does not expect you to bring all 7 days worth of badika clause to the rabbi before you go to the mikvah. It's not like he has to give you a pass to go to the mikvah. He's there as a resource when you're not sure. But you're in charge of your hilchot niddah. You're in charge of your own like status halachically, and you make the judgment call. So if you're going to be intellectually dishonest with yourself, that's between you and Hashem, and I guess your husband, right? That's not like that's. So if you want to take a red badika cloth, you're sure is red, and show it to someone, that's your decision. But if you're genuinely not sure, that's where that resource exists for you. So ask. So you know, oftentimes I'm like, sure, it's red, and it's not. And then I'm mad at my husband because I think he shouldn't be sure. And then he says it's someone else just to laugh at me and tell me it's fine, right? But it's always better to ask because then you feel better. Like, you know, you didn't make that call. It's not on you. It's like the bugs on the lettuce. Like, it's not on me. I don't have to care. I can eat as much kale as I want. I'm not checking it myself. It's too hard. I'm going to go to the Grove. Or Kosher Central.
I'll give a plug and say that from Frieberg has been probably 10 hours on the phone with me over the last few months for that spotting issue. And at first I was like so hesitant and she's so busy and just,
I'm not so busy. This is why I get paid.
but
Call me.
I think that had I not asked, I for sure would have been beat up way many more times than I should have been, but she did so patient and also welcome to sign in and giving me amazing insight. So I really give a lot of credit to you and a lot of support and help me, but you really helped me through it. So
Ask your questions.
I always
Yes.
get sorry about you.
Yeah, she's like, sorry to bother you. I'm like, it's fine. I'm happy to talk to you. Okay, there's a question here. 1 second, and it's late. Okay. How does it work with the badika Dropbox at shul? Okay. I am going to be talking about, okay, second question is faster. I'm going to be talking about IUDs in the 3rd class. We're going to talk about birth control in general. So we will talk about IUDs then. I'm not a super expert on birth control. I'm going to try to speak to a few friends before that class just to like really get to know the latest, because like I haven't done a training in a while, and like I feel like every year there's like some other thing out there on the market that like I should know about and I don't. But I will tell you what I know, and I will tell you who to ask if I didn't give you the information you needed. Okay, the badika Dropbox at the shul. There's a Dropbox right outside the door to the mikveh in the back of the shul. It's like an anonymous Dropbox. There is a little, I think, some slips of paper there that you can fill out, like check off like what day of your Shiva Nekiyim it is, or if it's not your Shiva Nekiyim, or like give any background information. In general, whenever you ask a question, I always suggest giving as much information as you can. Share if you're nursing, share if you're going through fertility treatment, anything that could maybe impact the situation is worth sharing, okay? You put it in the box, and you can either bring it in an envelope and just write all the information yourself and just put your cell phone number without your name if you don't want the rabbis to know who it is. It's supposed to be checked every day during the week at noon by the office. If you haven't heard back, like a few hours after noon since you last put it in the box, either call the office and speak to Sara or Elena and let them know I left something in the box yesterday. Can you make sure the rabbi saw it? Or if it's the weekend, send me or Rebecca Weinstock a text and let us know that you put something in the box, and we'll send our husbands to shul to go unlock the box and take it out, because there's nobody working in the office on the weekends, and so it sometimes gets forgotten about. But the system is supposed to be that the secretaries bring it in every day around noon, the rabbis look it over and they text back, or if it's more complicated, they'll call the person who submitted it anonymously. If you want them to know it's you, you can put your name, that would be helpful. If you don't want them to know it's you, you just put your phone number and that's it. If you're more comfortable talking to me and dropping it in my mailbox, you can do that. You can do the same with Rebecca Weinstock. My kids don't open the mail. And just put on the outside, like, for Sara Frieberg, so that they don't open it. And that's also an option. And then there's the Taharat app as well, which is also a really great resource. But the box at shul is supposed to be checked once a day. If it didn't get checked, sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. Just either call the office or send me or Rebecca a quick text, and we will make sure that whoever needs to deal with it deals with it. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
No problem.